everyone. My name is Annissa and Dr, and I'm grateful for you tuning in this afternoon. This discussion is part of my Community Impact series where I join residents from different backgrounds to bring awareness about their work. I believe the best way to find solutions to our most pressing issues is by making sure that everyone has a seat at the table. Today, I'm proud to be joined by Dr. Rana el Kaliouby, an Egyptian-American computer scientist and entrepreneur. As the co-founder and CEO of Affectiva, one of the leading tech companies of emotion. I'm sorry, I'm all congested here. I've got some sort of allergy going on. So that's why I'm jumbling all these words. I apologize. Affectiva is one of the leading tech companies of emotion recognition technology. Rana has been a recognized pioneer of artificial intelligence for her groundbreaking work to define the category of emotion AI. She also recently published a memoir titled Girl Decoded, a scientist's quest to reclaim our humanity by bringing emotional intelligence to technology. And I've got that book right here.
Thank you.
I'd love to welcome Rana. I met her just a few months ago on the Arab America special on Mother's Day, which introduced Arab American women to a conversation around their work in society. And you know, as an Arab American in politics and in Boston politics, I'm grateful to have Rana here today to talk about her work, and would love to introduce all of you to Rana. Rana, welcome. Tell us a little bit about your work, what's sort of special about this book and about your story and about everything that you're up to these days.
Thank you, Annissa, for having me. And it's a real honor and pleasure to be here with you and with everybody today. So I was born in Egypt. I'm originally from Cairo, Egypt, and I grew up around the Middle East. So I was in Kuwait for a number of years with my parents, and then Abu Dhabi. But I was always really interested in technology. So I studied computer science at the American University in Cairo, and then went on to do my PhD at Cambridge University, essentially building the very first ever emotionally intelligent machine. And we can talk about that a little bit. But then towards the end of my PhD, I met this MIT professor, Rosalind Picard, and she invited me to join the MIT Media Lab as her postdoc. And of course, for me, that was a dream come true. I joined MIT as a researcher and very quickly realized that there was a commercial opportunity in the technology I had kind of developed. And that was the impetus for starting Affectiva. We spun out of MIT in 2009. And just last week, we announced that we were getting acquired. So it's been, I'm sure like you, it's been a crazy busy year. It's been quite the year.
I missed that news. Congratulations on that. That's a big deal. What initially drew you to technology and to the sciences in particular?
So both my parents are technologists, so I have to give them credit, a little bit of credit for that. But honestly, I have always been fascinated by how technology changes the way people connect and communicate with one another. I mean, if you just look at the last year, technology has really allowed us to connect, right, in these challenging times of a pandemic. And so that's always been a common thread throughout my career. And I've just projected that AI and technology in general is just going to continue to become more and more ingrained in our daily lives. And I wanted to make sure that something you said, I wanted to make sure I had a seat at the table in designing and crafting what this future of technology looks like, because it impacts all of us.
So we can have this conversation around the actual technology and the actual science. I'm also interested in, and you talk about it in your book, Girl Decoded, around being and something I can relate to, a good Arab girl,
right?
And also, but doing, really important work that's generally in a field dominated by men. And you talk very specifically about navigating those worlds. So I'd love to hear about this. How do you move from good Arab girl to scientist?
Yeah, and so Girl Decoded is basically my memoir, and it follows my journey of being a nice Egyptian girl to becoming a tech CEO and an entrepreneur in a very male-dominated society and industry. And but weaved in it is the story of the technology too, because really it's just super intertwined with my life. and I think you'll resonate with that. I grew up as this nice Egyptian girl, right? Like, you don't challenge the status quo. Both my parents, very fortunately, really, really supported our education. I have two younger sisters. So the three of us, there was always an investment in our education. And I'm super grateful to my parents for that. It's why I believe I get to do what I do every day. It's because they invested in our learning and our education, both in the classroom and outside. We traveled a lot as kids, and we were always exposed to different cultures and countries. And I think that, that kind of open-mindedness and intellectual curiosity is really important. But I will have to say, it was all within the bounds of cultural norms, right? And so when I, for example, decided to go on and do my PhD, I was a new bride, and I had just gotten married, and my husband at the time had to stay in Egypt. And so my parents were really against me going, to get my PhD. And understandably, right? So I think I've had to navigate these cultural norms in the same way that I've had to navigate being a minority in the tech industry, right? And when I went out to raise our first round of funding, my co-founder, Rosalind Picard, we were both women, scientists, raising money for an emotion company and primarily pitching to, very non-diverse audiences, older white men. And so it was definitely challenging, but you persist, as I know you do, right? You persist and you just get it done.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think that there are lots of parallels to the world of politics and government, and in technology, and in your industry in particular. And I love hearing you talk about education, because certainly for my parents, for my family, and I have two younger sisters as well, and a brother, education was always that common thread, and always sort of that priority that we focused on as a family, for sure. So will you tell us a little bit about emotional AI? What does that mean? And tell us about that actual technology.
Well, if you look at human intelligence, your IQ, your cognitive intelligence matters, but your emotional intelligence, your ability to connect and communicate with other people and understand their emotions matters even more. And again, over the last year in particular, I feel like we've had to put empathy at the center of how we connect with one another, and that's really key. So IQ and EQ go hand in hand, but if you look at technology, especially technology that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, it's all about the IQ of these devices, and the EQ is missing. And so I've been on this journey to build machines that can understand your emotions, your facial expressions, your vocal intonations, using machine learning and computer vision and lots of data. And it's really fascinating because there are applications from autism to advertising research, to making our cars safer, to social robotics. It just cuts across many, many industries. I think it's really fascinating.
What's social robotics?
Oh, social robotics are, it's like an Amazon Alexa.
Okay. All right. Okay.
But it has a body, and it has not just ears. It not just only hears you, but it has eyes too, and it can see you, and then it can interact with you just like we interact with one another. And there's applications in learning and telehealth. It's a very exciting new area of research, and MIT actually, Boston is a hub for this type of research.
I love it. So I understand and appreciate the joy and passion you have around technology. What drew you specifically to the emotional AI piece?
Yeah, I would actually say it's my Arab heritage, right? In my family, we're very animated, and your expressions and your emotions really matter. And I felt that, I had this aha moment when I first got to Cambridge University. It was my first experience living away from my family. And I was like, wow, I'm interacting with this machine, and it has absolutely no idea how I'm feeling. And I started asking the question, well, what if computers could understand human emotions just as we do? And that story was over 20 years ago. And so I've been on this journey, building this technology and exploring applications of it.
Well, I think it certainly asking those questions in that way certainly speaks to your brilliance. And I want to note that Forbes magazine ranked you as part of America's top 50 women in tech, and you were also included in the Fortune list of 40 under 40. Can you speak about your experience being recognized, especially as a woman leading in this field and leading your own business?
I think the importance of all of this work, it's less about the recognition and it's more about representation matters, right? So when young women, young girls see people who look like me on these lists, who are like, these lists are traditionally very, very non-diverse, but they see somebody like me, I feel like that hopefully inspires them to pursue a career in technology, but maybe also just pursue a career in something they're passionate about. So I've really just become and it's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. I just really believe representation matters, and I almost have a responsibility to share my story. And I want to ask you that question back, right? Like, you're running for mayor of Boston. How's that experience been like, and what's driving you?
No, I appreciate the question. I love that you've asked the question. I think in many ways, my dad, who's from Tunisia, who's an Arab, he pushed me by once telling me that it wasn't a good idea to look at politics, to consider a role in government. And, for him, it was part of this, be a good Arab girl and do something a little bit more traditional, don't rock the boat.
Right.
But also his experience, immigrating to the United States was a difficult one. Immigrating to Boston was a difficult experience for him. And he once said to me as a teenager, I, just fell in love with Boston politics and municipal government and recognized and realized the really important role that politics and local government plays in our everyday lives. And at 15 years old, I said to my dad, I think I'm going to run for office someday. And his immediate response was, an Arab girl with an Arab name, you'll never win anything in this city. And he wanted me to go into education. He was over the moon when I became a high school teacher in Boston, because education, again, as you mentioned, is just central to everything that was most important to him. And, I think because my father said no, I, dug in and really, continued along that path, especially as a young person, really engaged in government, local politics. Didn't end up running for office until many years later. But it is around this representation matters. And it's important, if you don't see yourself reflected in the work that you're interested in, that you got to jump in and do it. So a lot of, my early mentors didn't look like me. So I'm, grateful to be on the list of candidates and happy to be a front runner in this race. And, I think, there's lots of young women and young girls that I hope see themselves, certainly in this field of diverse candidates this year, see a reflection of themselves in this field. But I also think it's important, I have 4 sons, that we don't forget that women should also be role models for boys and for their, it shouldn't be, we can only be role models for young women. And that helps advance, the diversity of future races and future opportunities for all sorts of people. If, they see that opportunity as possible. But, I think it's important though to celebrate how you've been recognized, whether it's by Fortune or Forbes, because you deserve that sort of recognition, but also by getting that recognition, it shows other women in particular, and Arab women specifically, that these are fields that they should explore.
Can I build on something you said that I think is really important, that it's this idea of diversity and inclusion, like bringing diverse voices to the table. And that's certainly something that is so key in the technology space, because if we design solutions and products that are optimized for a certain group of people, and it's trained, for example, in AI, if you train your algorithms on, middle-aged white men, and then you try to run the system around the world on people, from all over the world, it just won't work. And so kind of building diverse teams, but also ensuring that these teams have, are included in the conversation is really important. And so as kind of, I'm very passionate about that. And I've just joined the board of the Massachusetts Technology Leadership Council.
Oh, congratulations. That's great.
Yeah. And so we'd love to partner with you if, obviously Boston is a tech ecosystem. It's a tech hub. So,
yeah, we need to make sure that our young people across the city have opportunities to access, to explore careers and to engage in that work and consider it for their future. I love it. That's awesome. So, one of the challenges that I know women just in general face is, building business and really sort of being a part of creating that new business. But a big part of that is finding capital, and obviously you just sold your business. But can you talk a little bit about, there's, always studies done around women and startups and the challenges around raising money. What was your experience raising capital to launch Affectiva, especially as a woman? And how is this, the acquisition going, and how is negotiation going around all that? Especially your co-founder is also a woman.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say if you look at the statistics, unfortunately, it's quite dismal. So less than, I think it's 5% of all venture funding goes to women-founded companies in this day and age. And so again, I'm part of an organization called All Raise, and we support female founders, but also female investors, because you need investors to be diverse as well. It's not just the founders and entrepreneurs. So it's something that I'm very vocal, and again, I spend a fair amount of my mind shares trying to support both, sides of this coin. My personal experience doing this, we spun out of MIT, so we were able to get a lot of meetings with a broad base of investors. But again, like our very first roadshow, which was on Sand Hill Road in the Bay Area, because that's where a lot of the venture capitalists have offices back to back. We had like maybe 30 or so of these meetings lined up. And it was tough because we didn't look like any of the founders that they backed. We looked so different. Women, scientists, it was our first company. I actually used to wear the hijab at the time, so I was also visibly Muslim too. And we were pitching an emotion company. In fact, we called it the E word. We never talked about emotions. It was not in our company.
Well, I think that hasn't escaped me, that you are a female-run business, and with technology focused on emotion. And, there's lots of conversations we can have around women and emotion and stereotypes and assumptions.
Totally, yeah.
And add a hijab, and
this is like, but again, like one of the things I really learned from Roz Picard was perseverance. Like she would just not take no for an answer, right. And we had this deep conviction. I mean, I think this is one of my, if I were to give advice to anyone who's listening in and wants to embark on a journey of starting a company, you have to have this deep conviction. Yeah. Well, not just a company, I guess, even I guess, in any career, right? You have to have this, and you have to take a leap of faith too, because there's always a lot of unknowns. You don't really know what the journey will look like. And so I give this advice to my 2 kids as well, like embark on the journey, but don't attach to the outcome, right? Like do your best, hustle, but don't attach to one particular outcome. And it's definitely been true in my case. So, over the pandemic, I started kind of reconnecting with a lot of partners in our ecosystem, including some of our competitors. And with one particular company who ended up buying us, Smart Eye, we realized that, yes, we're on a path to compete, but wouldn't it be so much more powerful and much more of a strategic and bold move if we just joined forces? And, right. Sometimes you have to let your egos go. And I we're very excited about this joining of forces. And so we're, a couple of weeks out from closing the deal.
Well, I think that speaks to the particular skill that you and your partner bring as women in this industry. And it's probably, certainly a new concept perhaps within a field that is so male dominated. Let's talk about like sort of the road ahead then. So you've written your memoir, Girl Decoded, and obviously this has a last page. But so where does the road go from here? What is part 2 of Girl Decoded?
Yeah, it's definitely, Girl Decoded is a work in progress, right? So the book is out. It's been phenomenal. I thought, launching the book was the end point, and honestly, it's just the beginning. I've forged so many friendships and connections, especially doing this virtually, and so I'm excited about that. We're kind of thinking about maybe turning it into a series or a movie, or who knows.
And who knows where the road will go, right? You're not committed to a particular destination.
Totally.
So I like that. I think that's great advice too when we think about young people who are just beginning their career, whether it's in technology, whether it's in politics, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in the financial, whatever it is, not to set the destination so firm that you can't have, I think, varied experiences along the way.
Absolutely. Exactly.
So tell us a little bit about what, anyone that's watching at home that might order Girl Decoded for themselves, for their daughters, for their sons. Tell us tell us about your story and what they may read, the highlights, cliff notes.
The highlights, okay. It poses this point that we live in an empathy crisis. Mm-hmm. And again, I think it's really timely given the pandemic and how the world has evolved over the last year in particular. But it really starts with, and there's pictures. So you see pictures of my parents getting married in Cairo, and it starts with our family story growing up in the Middle East, which again demystifies, a lot of people haven't really travel to the Middle East or often don't get to meet people from that part of the world. And so I really just wanted to demystify what it's like to grow up in Egypt and around the Middle East. And then it follows my journey, to Cambridge and then to MIT. And then I become an American citizen and I have to study for the test and all of that. And also which freaks my kids out. But I talk about, my experience having both of them. And so my daughter actually is 18 now. She just graduated high school, and I think she's going to be following in your footsteps more than
very good. Oh, I love that.
Oh my gosh, she's definitely right up your alley. I tried to get her into tech, and she's not having it.
No, I love that, and I'm happy to have her on, whether it's shadowing me for the day at City Hall or trailing me on the campaign trail. That'll be fantastic. I love the idea of demystifying, especially Arab culture, especially for you being a Muslim, and being this good Arab girl, but entering a career and a field that is in many ways non-traditional, although I know that you have both your parents in technology and that really inspired you, and the role of education and all that. I think that it's wonderful that you mention all that. I happen to be getting ready just to do a little something for Father's Day. My dad's no longer with us, but I happened along, you mentioned, that's right, the wedding picture of your parents. I happen to have, and I'll just show it here because it's in my hand, the wedding picture of my parents.
That's amazing.
My mother, I'm not sure if you know, is Polish. My dad is Tunisian, from Tunisia. And both of them became naturalized citizens as well. My mother, when she was a teenager, because she came here as a young kid, and then my dad sometime in his 20s. But I think that in the Arab culture in particular, creating these and through your memoir, sharing those stories helps to demystify. And one thing I'm working on here in Boston is Boston has many sister cities. Mm-hmm. And as a high school student growing up, I happened to be part of the Kyoto Boston Sister City Exchange Program, which was really impactful in my life and something that was an invaluable experience for me. But we don't have an Arab sister city in Boston. Mm-hmm. So I'm working to make Tunis our Arab sister city for Boston. So creating a Boston-Tunis exchange. Tunis happens to have their first elected female mayor, who is also considered the Sheikah of the Medina. But there was a lot of controversy when she was elected mayor of Tunis, what to do, because now we have a woman, and how can she also be mayor of the old city and like the sheik of the old city? Because they're like, well, she could be the Sheikah. And
I love it.
They made it happen. So I'm excited about building more relationships between the Arab world and in the States, but in particular Boston and Tunis, and Egypt, and
Yeah.
we know how important Egypt is to our world history. But those to share more of that is just really wonderful.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, when you humanize these connections, right, they become real. Like it's so different reading about a country in the media versus meeting people who come from that part of the world and getting to know them and realizing that at the end of the day, we all share the same core values and the same kind of general goals, right?
Right.
So I've found that these connections are really important, and I think that's. Even though I'm in the tech industry and I'm building artificial intelligence, to me, it's always about the humans first. You put the people first.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'd love to talk about just for a moment, and you've mentioned it a few times today, is the impact of COVID and the pandemic and, existing sort of in this virtual reality, at least over this last year, how that has impacted your work, either positively or negatively. How have you... again, you're in the technology business, but it still adds this layer of complexity to the work that you're in the midst of.
Yeah, I mean, like many of us, when COVID first hit over a year ago, we had to pivot very quickly to doing everything virtually. And that was when I, very quickly realized, okay, I have to lead with empathy here, because you see a person's background and it looks like everything's in control, but you don't know what challenges they're going through, right?
I love that you say that it looks like everything's in control.
Right. But then you don't know what kind of chaos is happening outside of the camera view. And so we very quickly put a number of things in place, just giving people permission to be flexible with their working hours and taking breaks throughout the day to do laundry or lunch for the kids or go out for a walk, right? So I feel like this concept of leading with empathy became front and center for what we needed to do. Like many businesses, our business hurt at the beginning of the pandemic. It's reemerging. We're kind of, seeing an uptick again, thank goodness. But it was tough. It's been tough. But on the positive side, I think this last year and the acceleration of telehealth and online learning and video conferencing, it has really underscored the importance of our technology. And so, imagine if you and I had emotion, in this video stream, we had emotion AI integrated into our live stream. We could see the emotions of our audience, even though we can't see the audience in the same way we would if we were doing this in, City Hall. So I think it's just opened up a lot of interest and demand for our technology, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah, no, that's really, really exciting. And I appreciate the idea of like leading with empathy. And when you talk about, it's something I haven't thought about personally when looking at the box.
Right.
And who I'm talking to, if we're in a larger group meeting or in a forum on the campaign side, that's all you see is that moment in time. And we've, as things have reopened, one of my sisters is getting married. We had a shower for her here this last weekend. And, people came into the house and they're like, oh, Annissa, that's where you do a lot of your Zooms in that one spot. And we actually had done some work in the house. So at one point there was some chaos here on the other side of the computer monitor. People were like, you're really existing in this space. But you do make some perceptions about what you see. And these backgrounds are often very much curated. And, depending on, what it is that you're looking to share with the people you're talking to at that moment, it creates sort of the setting, which is sometimes, again, manufactured, curated, and other times it's not. If we've got, I had one day where there was something happening in this room, so I had to scoot to the next room over. Once I was in a city council meeting one day, and the kids were all doing school virtually. Someone had a presentation. I talked too loud into the camera. So I ended up sitting in my bed, and I realized, halfway through the council meeting that I was sitting in bed, and it was obvious to anyone looking that I'm an elected official, proud to represent the city of Boston, sitting in my bed taking a meeting.
But I think that's it, right? That's where we were all at, and accepting that and actually celebrating that makes you more human. I love it.
Yeah. Yes, I'm looking forward to being on the other side of this. But we've learned so much over this last year about ourselves, about each other, about our world, about our society, about our families. And I'm excited that many more will get to know about you here with Girl Decoded. Rana, thank you so much for being with me this afternoon to share a little bit about your story, about being a good Arab girl. And I wish you a bright future. And I can't wait to see what's next, especially with Girl Decoded. But thank you for all your work. Thank you for putting yourself out there, taking a risk, and doing something that very few have done. And many more will follow because of it.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'll follow you on the trail.
I love it. Rana, have a wonderful afternoon.
Take care. Bye.